Warning: the following program contains subject matter that may be disturbing to some audiences. Viewer discretion advised. You're listening to Descent to Depravity, where we investigate the darkest corners of the human psyche, one chilling story at a time.
A vicious crime story that's played out across 3 states. An Israeli citizen in the United States on a green card who's accused of stabbing 18 men and killing 5 of them. His name is Elias Abuelazam, and police finally caught up with him as he attempted to board a Delta plane bound for Israel. Jeremy Hubbard has the grim details.
A slew of men maimed or murdered from Michigan to Ohio to Virginia. This serial slasher case has both scared and spellbound entire communities.
The suspect in the 14 stabbing assaults in our community has been apprehended.
That's a question I want to ask him. Why?
This long one is from where they opened me up.
The tally of victims grew. 14 in Flint, 3 more in Leesburg, Virginia, 1 in Toledo, Ohio. The earliest in May, the most recent last weekend, all carried out in a similar way. That's when police realized they had a serial killer on their hands.
Well, the pattern is this series of stabbings, all occurring late at night, all occurring to individuals who are walking alone on the streets. The streets are deserted at the time that they're walking.
Abuelazam was apprehended without incident yesterday at the Atlanta airport just minutes before boarding a flight to Tel Aviv.
Elias Abuelazam was born on August 29, 1976, in the ancient city of Ramla, Israel, a place that had weathered centuries of occupation and conflict. He was the last born of 6, 5 older sisters and 1 boy who would never be told no. In a household where sons were worshipped, Elias Abuelazam was untouchable. Every mistake forgiven, every cruelty excused. The psychiatrist who examined him twice said it plainly. He was raised without consequence. His father's death came before memory had fully formed. Abuelazam was still a toddler, yet the absence hollowed him out early. He told the psychiatrist he felt as if he died alongside his father, and in some ways, he never came back. Raised in a tight-knit Arab Christian household, he grew up in a neighborhood where poverty and religious divides often fueled quiet resentment. Neighbors later described him as introverted, a boy who did what he was told, but rarely looked others in the eye. After his father passed away, his mother did what she could to handle the financial burden alone. According to relatives interviewed by Israeli media, Abuelazam often spoke about feeling trapped between 2 worlds, too Arab for Jewish Israel, too Israeli for Arab circles. That alienation would follow him across oceans. A childhood neighbor told reporters from the Hebrew language daily Mariv that Elias was a boy who did not fight, but who watched everything. He could sit silent for hours. Psychologists later testified at his trial that Abuelazam's tendency to observe and mimic rather than express was an early marker of a detached personality with low empathy. When Elias was still a teen, his mother secured U.S. residency through relatives in Michigan. The family moved between Ramla and the American Midwest before he finally settled in the United States permanently in the mid-1990s. The young immigrant attended community college courses and picked up occasional jobs in Virginia and Michigan. He stood 6'5" and weighed nearly 280 pounds, a massive frame that made him an intimidating presence, but those who knew him then described a different man. One acquaintance from Leesburg, Virginia, later told the Associated Press he was quiet, polite, and never seemed angry. You'd never think he'd hurt anyone. Before his name became synonymous with fear in Flint, Elias Abuelazam's record was a paper trail of small transgressions, the kind that appear innocuous until hindsight reveals their pattern. His early encounters with law enforcement were not marked by overt violence, but by a quiet disregard for boundaries, a man testing how close he could step to the line without consequence. Police records in Genesee County show citations for reckless driving as early as 1996, and again in 2002. Both were routine traffic stops, yet officers noted his flat effect and deliberate calm. At the time, those reports were archived as trivial. In retrospect, they became early documentation of what psychologists later described as an unnerving emotional neutrality. During the early 2000s, Abuelazam's movements were transient. He alternated between Leesburg, Virginia, and Bradenton, Florida, acquiring a series of low-wage jobs, warehouse shifts, retail, and finally a position as a mental health aide at Piedmont Behavioral Health Center. There, surrounded daily by psychotic and violent patients, his fascination with dominance began to surface in subtle ways. A former co-worker recalled to the Flint Journal, "He never raised his voice, never got angry, but when he restrained patients, he held them just a little too long." That same year, colleagues reported that Abuelazam had started collecting knives, pocket-sized at first, later the heavy hunting variety. He said it was for protection, though none could recall him ever being threatened. He rarely spoke of his personal life, though records show a string of short-term relationships, each ending abruptly when women claimed he was intense, jealous, or emotionally cold. Court filings from Loudoun County, Virginia, reference a 2008 misdemeanor alcohol violation, dismissed after he paid a fine. Another report surfaced from Manatee County, Florida, where a neighbor accused him of aggressive shouting and property damage after an argument. The case was closed without prosecution. Those who knew him described him as religious but angry when questioned. In Florida, acquaintances noticed his growing preoccupation with race and violence. One former roommate told investigators that Abuelazam often made strange comments about evil and skin color, insisting that some people carry darkness inside them. At the time, no one imagined how literally he meant it. In 2009, he relocated again, this time to Flint, Michigan. The city was collapsing under economic ruin and skyrocketing crime. Abuelazam moved in with an uncle at 3756 Maryland Avenue on the east side of Flint, a neighborhood riddled with boarded-up houses and vacant lots. His uncle owned a small market on Coldwater Road called Kingwater Market, where Abuelazam soon took a night shift job as a clerk. It was here that the quiet clerk from Ramla would evolve into something predatory. Working nights at the Kingwater Market, he became a fixture to regulars. The towering Israeli who bagged their beer, who smiled too slowly, who sometimes asked unsettling questions. A co-worker, Abdullah Farah, told reporters, "He was friendly, maybe too friendly, but there was something off. He watched everyone." Behind the counter, Abuelazam's world narrowed. He lived alone, drove aimlessly through Flint's hollow streets after midnight, and began to study people the way he once studied psychiatric patients, as subjects, not neighbors. By early 2010, subtle behavioral changes were evident. He'd grown increasingly erratic, muttering about evil spirits and God's will. His mother, speaking later to Haaretz, said her son called from Michigan claiming the devil was following him. Prosecutors would later argue that these statements were not delusions, but rationalizations, an attempt to wrap theology around compulsion. Neighbors on Maryland Avenue noticed him pacing his porch long after midnight, whispering to himself in Arabic, staring into the dark as if expecting someone to answer. A month later, the first blade would strike. At trial, his defense team would later claim he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a diagnosis prosecutors refuted, arguing his crimes were methodical and planned. And so, by the summer of 2010, Elias Abuelazam, the obedient boy from Ramla, the polite clerk at Kingwater Market, had crossed the invisible border between fixation and action. The prelude was over. What followed would leave 3 states haunted by a man who killed in silence, moved by impulse, and vanished before his victims hit the ground. May 24th, 2010. It began before dawn. Around 6 a.m., Flint police were called to a stretch of Leith and Dexter streets, quiet, residential, the kind of street where morning light struggles through overgrown maples. David Motley lay in the gutter beside his car, bleeding from multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. Neighbors thought at first it was a hit and run, until they saw the knife slashes in his clothing. Witnesses later told detectives they'd seen a white man in a dark green Chevrolet Blazer circling earlier that morning, asking for directions. When Motley leaned in to help, the stranger's arm flashed. The blade drove inward again and again, so quickly that most nearby heard only a grunt before tires screeched away. Autopsy reports listed 6 deep penetrating wounds, the fatal strike severing the subclavian artery. Police collected little physical evidence, just smeared fingerprints on the car window and a drop of blood too small to type. It was labeled isolated homicide. In truth, it was only the beginning. June 21st, 2010. Shortly after 2 a.m., Abdul Muhammad, a retired GM worker known for walking home from night prayer, was found sprawled near the curb near Avenue B and Wood Street, his Quran and cap lying feet away. The pattern matched the first. A single encounter, a question for directions, then a blitz attack. He'd been stabbed 4 times in the torso, 2 wounds piercing the left lung. Detectives noted there was no robbery, no struggle for a wallet. He was attacked solely for proximity. Neighbors told police they'd heard a man calling, "Help me, Lord," then silence. When the autopsy revealed identical blade impressions to the Motley case, investigators realized Flint's East Side fear was justified. They had a roaming killer. June 26, 2010. Just before 6 a.m., motorists discovered a man crumpled near a bus stop on Pearson Road. He was still breathing, blood soaking his work clothes. The attacker had driven off in a light-colored SUV. The victim survived, describing his assailant as a big white guy, maybe 6'4", who had pulled over claiming his car broke down. When he approached to help, the man lunged without warning. Hospital notes confirmed 5 non-fatal stab wounds to the chest and shoulder. Flint PD documented the event as serial pattern consistent. This survivor became the first to give detectives a clear composite, one that would later match Abuelazam's driver license photo. July 12, 2010, Maple and Saginaw Road, Beecher, Michigan. Near 1:30 a.m., residents of Beecher heard shouting, then the squeal of tires. When officers arrived, Antoine Jackson was face down on the asphalt, his shirt soaked through. He'd been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and left arm. The precision suggested an attacker who knew where to strike to disable without immediate death. His heart had been grazed. Jackson bled out before EMS arrived. The coroner later wrote, "Multiple incised wounds with sharp force trauma to thoracic cavity, consistent with a long blade weapon." Investigators now suspected the killer was carrying the same knife from the May and June attacks. A store clerk later told reporters, "He used to come in for smokes around midnight. He didn't bother nobody. Whoever did that waited for him." July 19, 2010, North Saginaw and Julia Avenue, Genesee Township, Michigan. The attack occurred just after 12:15 a.m. A 49-year-old man was walking home from a friend's when a driver pulled alongside and asked if he could help move a truck. Moments later, the blade found his side. He collapsed, but survived long enough to give detectives a fragmented account, describing the same Chevy Blazer and greenish eyes. Medical records show 4 stab wounds, one puncturing the diaphragm. Surgeons saved him after hours in critical care. His survival added weight to the growing theory of a single mobile assailant striking random strangers. Police began canvassing every late-night convenience store on Flint's north side. July 26, 2010. Garland Street near West 5th Avenue, Flint, Michigan. Around 1:25 a.m., Flint dispatchers received multiple 911 calls from residents who heard a man screaming for help. Officers found Darnell Marshall lying in the street, clutching his abdomen, whispering, "He came out of nowhere." He'd been stabbed 5 times. One wound penetrated the liver. Marshall was transported to Hurley Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. Forensic technicians noted the killer's pattern. Late-night hours, lone victims, sudden burst of violence, escape in seconds. Detective Lee Tidball later said, "It was like he was feeding off opportunity. He hunted with no plan except to kill." July 27, 2010. Pearson and Fleming Road, Flint, Michigan, shortly after 3:00 a.m. Patrol units discovered a man sprawled across a rain-darkened intersection. His shirt was shredded, the asphalt beneath him slick with blood. He'd been on his way home from a friend's when a stranger in a green blazer waved him over for car trouble. The moment he leaned toward the window, the blade slashed out, cutting into his chest and abdomen. The killer fled north, headlights vanishing into the mist. The victim survived after emergency surgery, later telling detectives, "He didn't say a word, just stabbed and smiled." Police noted that each assault was moving geographically closer to Abuelazam's workplace, the Kingwater Market, on Coldwater Road in Matt Morris Township. July 28, 2010. Cook and Leith Streets, Flint, Michigan. At roughly 3:30 a.m., residents awoke to shouting outside a corner lot near Cook Street. A teenager lay motionless on the curb, stabbed repeatedly in the chest. He'd been walking home from a friend's when he encountered the same green SUV asking for directions. An autopsy revealed 5 sharp force injuries, one through the sternum, one grazing the heart, and another cutting the trachea. He died within minutes. Police later stated this attack cemented the killer's comfort zone. The murder scene was barely half a mile from the first homicide in May. The circle had closed. July 29, 2010, Saginaw and 12th Street, Flint, Michigan. Just before sunrise, another call came in. Same hour, same method. The victim was found on the pavement near a shuttered storefront, stabbed multiple times in the chest and side. He'd been walking to a corner store for cigarettes. The autopsy revealed a wound that penetrated between ribs 3 and 4, nicking the aorta. Witnesses told police they saw the attacker's Chevy Blazer idling under a street lamp, the driver tall, heavy-set, with close-cropped hair. Within hours, Abuelazam was stopped and cited for providing alcohol to a minor, unrelated to the stabbings, an eerie near-miss that put his name, Elias Abuelazam, in local law enforcement databases for the first time. July 30, 2010, Miller Road outside Italia Gardens, Flint Township, Michigan. It was just after 3:30 a.m. when the attack occurred. Frank Kelly Brown, a church custodian, had finished a late shift and was walking home along Miller Road when the Blazer slowed beside him. The driver called out for directions. Seconds later, Kelly Brown was on the ground, stabbed 5 times, one wound deep enough to puncture the right lung. He crawled a few feet toward the curb before collapsing under a streetlight. Only hours after Kelly Brown's body was found, the killer struck again. Around 2:30 a.m., a 17-year-old boy was attacked just blocks away. He survived, barely, stabbed twice in the chest, one strike piercing the lung. He described his attacker as a white man with short hair and a strange calmness. The teenager told detectives he didn't look angry, he looked empty. Hospital records confirmed the same type of knife wounds consistent with prior cases. By now, police had issued an all-points bulletin for a Chevy Blazer, dark green or teal, with a possible out-of-state plate. What they didn't yet know was that their suspect worked only miles from several crime scenes, ringing up customers at a corner store. August 2, 2010. The violence reached its apex that warm night. Around 2:30 a.m., witnesses reported a struggle under a flickering street lamp near South Saginaw Street. Arnold Miner, 49, was stabbed repeatedly while walking home. Autopsy findings later confirmed multiple deep wounds to the chest and neck, the fatal strike severing the jugular vein. Miner was found with his pockets turned out, his keys a few feet away. The attacker had paused long enough to ensure he was dead before leaving. Miner's murder became the case that finally unified state, federal, and local investigators under what they now called the Flint Serial Stabber Task Force. His cousin, Stephanie Ward, later told reporters through tears, he didn't deserve to die walking home. That man was a monster. Within 24 hours, Abuelazam abruptly quit his job at King Water Market, telling his manager he was leaving for Virginia. August 3, 2010, near the 2100 block of Mary Street, Flint, Michigan. It was the still hour before dawn when the call came in. Man down in the driveway. Neighbors told police they thought they'd heard a trash can topple. But what they'd heard was Dwight Taylor collapsing. Taylor, 44, had been stabbed multiple times while taking out his garbage. His body was found just feet from his front steps, one hand still gripping the lid. The coroner's report was brief but chilling. 5 stab wounds, 3 deep enough to puncture vital organs, 1 severing the pulmonary artery. He died within minutes. Investigators noted that his home was just blocks from several prior attacks. The killer's hunting ground was closing in on itself, as if he were looping through Flint in widening circles, perfecting the act. Detective Lee Tidball later said, "He was stalking people the way a fisherman circles a lake. He knew his pattern and he was confident in it." 2 days later, just after 1 a.m. in Flint Township, Michigan, another man was attacked walking home from a friend's. He survived, but the blade punctured his chest 3 times, one wound narrowly missing his heart. He told investigators the same thing other survivors had said. A white man in a green Chevy Blazer pulled alongside him, claimed to need directions, and then lunged from the driver's window. He didn't even get out, the victim recalled. He just leaned in with the knife and hit me like he meant to kill. That testimony, calm, detached, nearly identical to previous survivor accounts, convinced the task force they were closing in on a single suspect, someone methodical, mobile, and escalating. Within hours of that assault, Abuelazam packed his bags and left Michigan entirely, heading for Virginia. August 6, 2010. The scene shifted east, Leesburg, Virginia, an affluent, quiet suburb nearly 500 miles from Flint. Abuelazam arrived to stay with relatives, telling them he was taking a break from work. Within 24 hours of arriving, he struck again. At 9:30 p.m., Frank Huth, 19, was walking home from a friend's house when a dark SUV slowed beside him. The driver asked if he could help find a construction site. As Huth leaned in to answer, the knife flashed, once deeply. Huth staggered away, clutching his back, screaming for help. A witness called 911. He survived with a single deep stab wound near the left shoulder blade, narrowly missing the lung. Police canvassed the area and within hours had an eyewitness report and surveillance of a Chevy Blazer, with Michigan plates leaving the scene. Leesburg detectives connected the dots almost instantly. The FBI had just circulated a bulletin, describing a Flint area suspect driving the same vehicle. That same night, while Virginia police investigated Huth's stabbing, Abuelazam was already heading west. Somewhere along I-70, he began moving toward Toledo, Ohio, striking twice within the next 24 hours. At 11 p.m., a 26-year-old man was attacked outside a gas station near Bancroft Street. He told police later that a man in a green SUV had asked if he could help with jumper cables. When he approached, the knife tore into his chest. The wound was deep, but he survived. Detectives later found traces of tire marks and partial footprints in the gravel, later matched to Abuelazam's boots seized after his arrest. Less than 12 hours later, Abuelazam struck again, a 60-year-old man walking home from a grocery store. The attacker pulled alongside, rolled down the window, and asked if he'd seen a lost dog. When the man leaned in, the blade entered his abdomen with such force that the handle struck skin. The victim collapsed in the street, but lived long enough to describe the suspect as a large white male, with a thick accent, driving a green Chevy Blazer with Michigan tags. That single detail, Michigan plates, allowed Toledo detectives to cross-reference the vehicle with Flint's ongoing serial stabbing bulletin. The task force now had a clear tri-state link: Flint, Leesburg, and Toledo. The final known attempt came later that night. A man walking downtown reported that a green SUV pulled up, the driver asking for directions. But as the window rolled down, the man noticed something glint in the driver's hand and bolted. Witnesses heard the vehicle screech away. This near miss would mark the last time Elias Abuelazam tried to kill. He thought he could outrun an entire nation, but his name was already echoing through every terminal in America. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton, 2011. August 11, 2010. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Atlanta, Georgia. The concourse was humming with the dull static of airport life. Rolling luggage wheels, flight calls, coffee cups clattering. At gate E7, a 6'5" man stood quietly by the window, ticket in hand. Delta Flight 152, Atlanta to Tel Aviv. Back in Michigan, the multi-agency task force had already been awake for 20 straight hours. Flint detectives patched through to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, confirming their suspect had purchased the one-way ticket under his own name. Elias Abuelazam, Israeli national permanent U.S. resident. At 9:47 p.m., a federal alert pinged through the airport's watch network. Agents converged on the gate in plain clothes. "He didn't run," recalled Special Agent Chris Hess of the FBI's Detroit field office. "He just stared, like he knew the game was over." Customs officers flanked him from both sides. Witnesses later said he barely reacted when asked to produce identification. He looked down at the passport, then back at the officers. There was no protest, no plea. Officer Luis Menendez described the moment in his incident report. "Subject remained calm, Pulse steady, no visible perspiration, complied fully. When informed he was wanted for multiple homicides in Flint, Michigan, he exhaled once and said, "Okay." It was 10:02 p.m. when the cuffs clicked. A crowd of passengers watched as a man once dubbed the Flint Serial Stabber by the national press was quietly escorted through the terminal's service corridor. A journalist later wrote, "For a killer who thrived on motion, the walk to the holding cell was the first time in months his steps had no destination." At that same hour, nearly 700 miles away, the task force command post inside the Genesee County Sheriff's Office was vibrating with radio chatter. Detective Randy Kimes' phone rang once before he answered. "We got him," said the agent on the other end. Kimes leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing through his voice. 10 weeks, he muttered. 10 weeks of ghosts and green SUVs. In the background, an officer clapped his hands once and whispered, "Finally." The phrase echoed across the room like a prayer. By midnight, Prosecutor David Layton faced cameras at an impromptu press briefing. At 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Elias Abuelazam was taken into custody at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, he said. This suspect is believed to be responsible for as many as 18 stabbing assaults across multiple states. Behind him stood representatives from Flint PD, Michigan State Police, and the FBI. Layton's closing line became the headline splashed across the Flint Journal the next morning. After a night in Atlanta's Airport Detention Center, Abuelazam was moved under heavy guard to Fulton County Jail. There, detectives from Flint arrived to perform formal extradition paperwork. Reporter Keith Metheny later wrote, "He showed no emotion. When asked if he understood the charges, he nodded once. When offered food, he refused." Georgia marshals described him as unnervingly polite. Photographs taken for booking showed a faint smile, an image that circulated globally before sunrise. CBS News captioned it, "The Face of the Flint Stabber." On August 24, 2010, Abuelazam was extradited to Michigan under tight security. The transport convoy left Atlanta before dawn, arriving at Flint Bishop Airport just after 3 p.m. Television crews waited on the tarmac as a white van rolled into the Genesee County Jail garage. Inside, Sheriff Robert Pickle held a brief press conference. "The people of Flint can sleep tonight. The man who brought terror to this city is behind bars." That night, thunder rolled across Genesee County, a storm thick with the sound of rain against cruiser roofs. Flint's first peaceful evening in almost 3 months. Flint's homicide interrogation room was as sterile as it was symbolic. Gray walls, fluorescent buzz, a single metal table scarred by years of confession and denial. At 8:37 a.m. on August 13, 2010, Elias Abuelazam was escorted in from the holding wing. Shackled at the wrists, expression unbroken, he took the chair without being told. Detective Kimes opened the recorder with the procedural line. "This interview concerns multiple homicides within Genesee County." The suspect nodded once. Observers described his demeanor as unnervingly composed, not defiant, not remorseful, just absent. The first hour produced nothing but breathing and paper rustle. When detectives placed photos of the victims on the table, Arnold Miner, Frank Kellybrew, David Motley, Abuelazam's eyes tracked them, not with recognition, but with faint curiosity, as if studying medical slides. Lieutenant T.P. Johnson leaned forward. "You know these men. You talked to them before they died." No answer. Johnson tapped the photograph of Miner. "He called you sir before you stabbed him. Did you hear him say it?" Abuelazam's reply, recorded on the transcript, was almost whispered. "I don't remember them." That phrase would repeat 12 more times. When investigators shifted strategy, showing him cell tower maps, receipts, DNA results, his composure fractured slightly. He looked at the red-lined map connecting Flint, Toledo, and Leesburg, and muttered in Arabic, "Too much noise." Kimes pressed him. "Noise from what, Elias?" "From the world." He refused to elaborate. Forensic psychologist Dr. Paul Sheener, later called as an expert witness, reviewed the footage and noted, his affect was flat. There was no physiological anxiety response. That's consistent with antisocial pathology, not psychosis. Detectives ended the second session by laying out the report from the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. Miner's DNA found on the steering wheel of his Chevrolet Blazer. Kimes read aloud. Victim's blood detected on driver's side steering wheel, gear shift, and floor mat. Abuelazam didn't blink. Someone else drove it, he said. The room went still. Kimes replied, "There's only one person's prints on that wheel, Elias. Yours." Still, no confession followed. After 5 hours, interrogators switched out, introducing Detective Sean Ellis, trained in behavioral elicitation. Ellis shifted to empathy. "Elias, help me understand why. Were you angry at someone? Were you hearing something?" Abuelazam folded his hands, staring at his reflection in the tabletop. "They thought bad things about me, the men outside. I stopped them before they could hurt me." That single line became central to the defense's later argument of paranoid delusion, though prosecutors saw something else: calculated self-justification. When the recording stopped at 2:11 p.m., officers noted that Abuelazam rose calmly, thanked them for the conversation, and asked for water. Kimes later told the Flint Journal, "He walked back to his cell like he'd just finished a shift at work. That's what chilled me." Back in the observation booth, Lieutenant Johnson turned off the monitor. "He's not crazy," he said quietly. "He's hollow." In the weeks following the interrogation, court-appointed psychiatrists evaluated Abuelazam at the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Ypsilanti. The report concluded, subject exhibits traits of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder. He understands the nature and wrongfulness of his actions. This evaluation would dismantle any attempt at an insanity defense at trial. Elias Abuelazam's trial unfolded in the tense quiet of the Genesee County Courthouse. Reporters filled the aisles as the man who had terrorized Flint entered courtroom 2B, expressionless, shackled, flanked by deputies. Prosecutor David Layton told jurors that Abuelazam prowled Flint streets, luring strangers with a soft voice before stabbing them. DNA from the Chevy Blazer tied him to victim Arnold Miner, and survivor Bill Fisher pointed him out in court. "That's him. He smiled right before he hit me." Detectives described his unflinching demeanor during interrogation, and footage showed his Blazer circling near the murder scene. Defense attorney Brian Morley claimed schizophrenia drove the killings, that Abuelazam heard voices warning him about devils. But Layton dismantled the plea, reminding jurors the accused booked an international flight and concealed his weapon. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury found Abuelazam guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Joseph Farah condemned his crimes. "You murdered a man whose only mistake was stopping to help you. That is the definition of depravity." Judge Joseph Farah sentenced him to life without parole.